Physics doesn't lie. Metal that has been sitting in a scrapyard since 1975 should be stone cold, especially on a night like this, with the Oregon rain freezing everything it touches. My name is Caleb Vance. I spent 20 years as an Army mechanic. I know dead machines, and I know that dead machines don't have a pulse. They told me this helicopter was a relic, a hollow shell delivered to my farm to rot in peace. But a few moments ago, when I touched the exhaust manifold, it was hot, burning hot. Someone, or something, flew this bird here tonight. And judging by the way my dog, Titan, just bared his teeth at the cockpit, they haven't left yet. If you want to uncover the truth behind this silent legacy and find out why a dead machine is still warm, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you do not want to miss what we are about to find inside that cockpit. It started just 30 minutes earlier. The delivery driver didn't even turn off his engine. He just left the massive tarp-covered shape on the wet grass near my barn, shoved a clipboard in my face and looked at his watch. "Sign here, Mr. Vance," he said, chewing on a toothpick. "Dispatch said to drop it and go. Weirdest haul I've done in a decade. Who inherits a busted-up Huey in the middle of nowhere?" I signed the paper. My handwriting is shakier than it used to be. Arthritis is a thief that steals a little more of you every winter. But I managed to scrawl Caleb Vance. "A friend left it to me," I muttered. "An old friend." The driver shrugged, climbed back into his cab, and gunned it out of there. He didn't like the energy of this place. Neither did I, to be honest. Not tonight. I stood there in the driveway, the rain soaking through my flannel jacket. Next to me sat Titan. He's a Belgian Malinois, a retired K9 unit, same as me. We're both a little gray in the muzzle, both dealing with bad hips and memories we can't quite shake. Usually Titan is glued to my leg, but tonight he was pacing, a tight, anxious circle. "It's just a heap of junk, buddy," I told him, wiping rain from my glasses. "Just a souvenir from Colonel Holloway." We managed to winch the helicopter into the old crop duster hangar I use as a barn. It took the tractor and every ounce of patience I had left. Once it was inside, out of the storm, the silence of the farm returned. Just the rhythm of the rain on the tin roof, a sound that usually helps me sleep, but tonight it felt like a countdown. I grabbed my utility knife and cut the ropes holding the tarp. The canvas fell away, revealing the olive-drab skin of a Bell UH-1 Iroquois. A Huey, the icon of Vietnam, the angel of mercy. I hadn't been this close to one since I was 22 years old, sweating in the jungle humidity, smelling jet fuel and fear. It was in bad shape. Rust ate at the rivets. The skids were bent. The U.S. Army stencil on the tail boom was faded to a ghostly white. It looked exactly like what the executor of the will had said. Scrap metal. I walked around the fuselage, running my hand along the cold aluminum. It brought back memories. Some good, most bad. I remembered the noise they made, that distinctive whop, whop, whop of the rotors that you felt in your chest before you heard it with your ears. I reached the rear of the aircraft, near the engine housing. That's when the world tilted sideways. I put my hand on the exhaust port, expecting the biting chill of December metal. Instead, heat radiated through my glove. I froze. I stripped the glove off and pressed my bare palm against the turbine housing. It wasn't just warm, it was hot. The kind of residual heat you feel after a long flight. The heat of an engine that had been running hard less than an hour ago. "That's impossible," I whispered. The steam of my breath hung in the air. This machine had no battery. The fuel lines should have been dry rot. It was delivered on a truck. It couldn't have been running. "Titan," I called out, needing a reality check. Titan didn't come to me. He was standing at the front of the helicopter, near the pilot's door. Now you have to understand something about Titan. He's a service dog now, but he was trained for bomb detection and patrol. He doesn't spook. He doesn't bark at thunder. He is the most disciplined creature I have ever known. But he was standing rigid, his body coiled like a spring. His ears were pinned back against his skull. A low, guttural growl vibrated in his chest, a sound I hadn't heard since our days on patrol. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring directly at the dark glass bubble of the cockpit. "What is it, boy?" I asked, my hand instinctively moving to the waistband of my jeans, reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there. I was just an old man in a barn, not a soldier anymore. Titan took a step backward. He wasn't aggressive. He was blocking me. He was putting his body between me and the pilot's door. He looked back at me for a split second, his amber eyes wide and pleading. Don't go in there, Caleb. I ignored him. I had to know. I pulled my flashlight from my pocket and clicked it on. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the swirling dust motes. I aimed it at the cockpit glass. It was empty. No ghost pilot. No raccoon nesting in the seat. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. See? It's nothing, Titan. You're getting senile, old man. I stepped around the dog and grabbed the handle of the pilot's door. It groaned, metal grinding against metal, as I slid it open. The smell hit me first. Not the smell of old mildew and rot. It smelled like fresh grease, ozone, and something else. Faint, like expensive cologne. I swept the flashlight beam across the dashboard. The gauges were cracked, but the switches were toggled to the on position. Then the light landed on the pilot's seat. Sitting right there, on the tattered leather cushion, was a thick manila envelope. It looked brand new. It was taped to the leather with a single strip of red electrical tape. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached in, my fingers trembling, and pulled the envelope loose. There was no address, no stamp, just 3 words scrawled in thick black marker, in handwriting I recognized immediately. It was Colonel Holloway's handwriting, but Holloway had been dead for 2 weeks. I shined the light on the words, reading them out loud in the empty barn. Don't look for it. Titan let out a sharp bark. Not a warning this time, an alert. I looked up. Through the Rain Street window of the barn, out past the driveway, I saw the headlights of a car turn off. Someone was at the gate, and they were watching. The headlights at the gate didn't move. They just sat there, twin beams cutting through the Oregon mist like eyes in the skull of the night. In the movies, this is the part where the hero grabs a shotgun and runs out into the rain screaming. But I'm not a hero, and I'm too old to be running on wet gravel. I did what any man living out in the sticks would do. I killed the lights in the barn. Darkness is a friend when you know the terrain better than the intruder. I put a hand on Titan's collar. He was vibrating with tension, that low growl still rumbling in his chest like a diesel engine idling. Steady, I whispered. We waited. 1 minute. 2. Then the car at the gate flashed its high beams once, a silent signal, and slowly backed away. I watched the red taillights fade down the county road until they were swallowed by the Douglas firs. They weren't attacking. Not yet. They were confirming delivery. I let out a breath that rattled in my lungs. I locked the heavy sliding doors of the hangar and dropped the iron security bar into place. It wouldn't stop a determined team, but it would make enough noise to wake the dead. I turned back to the helicopter. In the darkness, with only the storm pounding on the tin roof, the Huey looked like a sleeping beast. The warmth radiating from its engine block felt like a violation of the laws of nature. I clicked my flashlight back on and climbed into the cargo bay. My knees popped. A reminder of too many jumps with the 101st Airborne 40 years ago. The interior smelled of hydraulic fluid and old canvas, a scent that instantly transported me back to the airfield at Fort Campbell. Don't look for it, the note had said. Well, Colonel Holloway knew me better than that. Telling a recon man not to look for something is like telling a hound dog not to track a scent. It only guarantees he's going to dig until his paws bleed. I sat in the pilot's seat. The leather was cracked and worn smooth by decades of backside friction. I gripped the cyclic, the control stick between the knees. It felt natural, an extension of my arm that I hadn't realized I missed until this very moment. Okay, old girl, I muttered to the dashboard. Talk to me. I opened the glove box on the center console. It was empty, save for a few dead moths and a green canvas-bound logbook, the kind we use to meticulously record every flight hour, every oil change, every loose nut. I opened it to the first page. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded to gray. Dates from 1972, 1973, 1974. Missions in places that didn't officially exist. I flipped through the decades. The log stopped abruptly in 1985, marked decommissioned. But then I saw it. The paper at the very back of the book was different, crisper, whiter. I shined the light closer. There were new entries, handwritten in blue ballpoint pen. October 12th, replaced main rotor seals. Flushed hydraulic system. November 05, avionics test. Radio frequency 1422 operational. November 28th, test flight. 45 minutes, low altitude, no leaks. I stared at the date. November 28th. That was Thanksgiving. Titan, I whispered, my voice sounding hollow in the metal fuselage. The colonel died on November 30th. 2 days before his heart attack, Colonel Holloway, a man who needed a cane to walk to his mailbox, had apparently flown a 3-ton military helicopter for 45 minutes. I traced the signature at the bottom of the page. J. Holloway, it was his signature. The loop on the Y was unmistakable. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter draft slid down my spine. I looked out the windshield into the dark barn. I half expected to see him standing there, leaning on his cane, smoking one of those terrible cigars he loved. Suddenly, the helicopter shifted. Titan had jumped up into the cabin. Usually, I don't let him up on the furniture, but tonight the rules didn't apply. The dog moved past me, squeezing between the pilot and co-pilot seats. The growling had stopped. His body language had changed completely. His ears were perked forward, his tail giving a slow, rhythmic thump, thump, thump against the metal bulkhead. He buried his nose into the fabric of the co-pilot's seat and inhaled deeply. Then he looked at me and let out a soft woof. It wasn't a bark of warning, it was a bark of recognition. I leaned over and sniffed the seat myself. Beneath the smell of old dust, there was something else. Peppermint and stale tobacco. Colonel Holloway always carried peppermint candies in his pocket to hide the smell of his cigars. "He was here, wasn't he, boy?" I asked, scratching Titan behind the ears. "He sat right in this chair." The realization hit me hard. This wasn't a ghost story. This was something more desperate. The colonel hadn't been senile. He had been preparing. You don't replace rotor seals and flush hydraulic systems on a museum piece unless you plan to use it. He was getting this bird ready for a mission he didn't live long enough to complete. And now that mission was parked in my barn. I climbed out of the cockpit and opened the engine cowling. I pulled the dipstick. The oil wasn't black sludge. It was golden, translucent, clean as honey. I checked the fuel filter. Brand new. This machine wasn't scrap. It was a getaway car. "But what were you running from, Jim?" I asked the empty air. Titan didn't answer. He was busy doing something strange. He had moved to the rear of the cargo bay, near where the troop seats used to be. He was scratching at the floor. Scritch, scritch, scritch. "Titan, knock it off," I said, wiping grease from my hands with a rag. "We don't scratch the upholstery." He ignored me. He pawed at the diamond plate metal floor, then looked at me, then pawed again. He whined, a high-pitched sound of frustration. I walked over to him. "What is it, a rat?" I shined the light where he was scratching. It was just a standard panel of diamond plate aluminum, riveted to the floor frame. Nothing special. But Titan pressed his nose into the seam between the plates and sneezed. I knelt down. My knees protested again, cracking loud enough to echo. I ran my gloved fingers along the rivets. They were cold. They were metal. Wait. I rubbed the dust away from one of the rivet heads. I pushed on it with my thumb. It depressed slightly. It wasn't a rivet. It was a spring-loaded button disguised as a rivet. My heart started doing that heavy drumming again. I looked at Titan. "You smart son of a gun." I found 3 more false rivets in the corners of the panel. I pressed them all down. There was a soft, pneumatic hiss like a bus door opening, and the panel popped up an inch. It was a false bottom, a smuggler's hold. I hesitated. The note in my pocket felt heavy. "Don't look for it." But I wasn't looking for it. Whatever it was, I was just doing maintenance. That's what I told myself. That's the lie you tell yourself before you cross a line you can't uncross. I wedged my fingers under the panel and heaved. It was heavy, lined with lead, probably to block X-rays or radiation scanners. Beneath the floorboards, nestled in a bed of black foam, sat a hard-shell Pelican case. It was battered, covered in travel stickers from places like Beirut, Saigon, and Kiev. Titan stopped scratching. He sat down and stared at the case, his head cocked to the side. I reached down and pulled the case out. It was heavy, maybe 40 pounds. I set it on the floor of the helicopter. There was a padlock on the handle, but it wasn't locked. The shackle was open, hanging loose. Someone had been in a hurry. I took a deep breath of the cold, damp air. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the barn doors. I flipped the latches on the case. Clack, clack. I lifted the lid. Inside, there were no gold bars, no stacks of cash, no drugs. There was only a stack of reel-to-reel audio tapes, a topographic map of the Cascade Mountains with a red circle drawn around a location I didn't recognize, and a single frame photograph. I picked up the photo. It was black and white, grainy. It showed a group of young men standing in front of this very helicopter. They were smiling, shirtless, holding beers. I was on the left, young and skinny. Holloway was in the middle. But it was the man on the right that made my blood turn to ice water. It was Senator Mitchell, the man currently running for President of the United States. And on the back of the photo, in Holloway's handwriting, was a date, December 12th, 1972. I dropped the photo. December 12th, the day our platoon was officially listed as stand down, the day we were supposed to be in base camp. But we weren't in base camp that day, and neither was Senator Mitchell. Titan let out a low growl, looking toward the barn door again. The car was back. The car at the gate was a black SUV. American-made, tinted windows, government plates. It sat idling in the rain, the exhaust puffing white clouds into the high beams. They weren't hiding anymore. They were waiting. I didn't wait with them. I grabbed the handle of the Pelican case. It was heavier than it looked. 40 pounds of dead weight, or maybe just the weight of the past. "Let's go, Titan," I snapped. Titan didn't need telling twice. He stuck close to my leg, moving with that tactical fluidity he'd learned in Baghdad. We exited the hangar through the side door, slipping into the muddy dark of the yard. The freezing rain hit me instantly, soaking through my flannel shirt and chilling the sweat on my back. My farmhouse is about 50 yards from the barn. It's a 2-story Craftsman I bought with my GI Bill money back in the 80s. It's sturdy, built of cedar and stubbornness, but tonight it felt flimsy. I hurried up the porch steps, my boots heavy with Oregon mud, and fumbled with the keys. Behind me, the sound of tires crunching on gravel cut through the storm. They were driving up the driveway. I shoved the key in, turned the tumbler, and threw the door open. Titan bolted inside. I followed, slamming the heavy oak door behind me and throwing the deadbolt. Click, then the chain. Rattle. Then I dragged the heavy hallway table, a piece of solid oak my wife had refinished before she passed, in front of the door. It wouldn't stop a battering ram, but it would buy me 3 seconds. In my line of work, 3 seconds is a lifetime. "Kitchen now," I ordered. We moved into the kitchen. It was the heart of the house, smelling of stale coffee and the wood stove. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I wasn't going to give them a target. The only illumination came from the blue glow of the digital clock on the microwave and the faint orange embers dying in the wood stove. I hoisted the Pelican case onto the kitchen table, shoving aside a stack of unpaid bills and a mason jar full of spare change. Titan shook himself violently, sending a spray of cold rainwater across the linoleum. He didn't relax, though. He paced to the window over the sink, stood on his hind legs, and peered out through the blinds. He let out a low, "Woof." I joined him. Through the slats, I saw the SUV parked just outside the reach of my porch light. The engine was running. No one got out. They were just sitting there, watching. "Psychological warfare," I muttered. "They want us to sweat, buddy." I turned my attention back to the case. My hands were shaking. Adrenaline and age make for a lousy cocktail. I sat down at the table and pulled the black and white photograph out of the box again. I needed to be sure. I needed to know I wasn't just a crazy old man seeing ghosts. I dug my reading glasses out of my shirt pocket and held the photo under the faint light of the stove hood. There we were, 1972. A group of kids who thought they were immortal. Holloway was grinning, a cigar clenched in his teeth. I was holding a wrench, covered in grease, and on the far right, looking uncomfortable in his fatigues, was Mitchell. Senator Franklin Mitchell, the front-runner for the upcoming election, the man whose campaign slogan was "Integrity Restored." I looked at the date on the back again, December 12th, 1972. "December 12th, I whispered, Operation Silent Echo. The memory hit me like a physical blow. We were supposed to be on leave in Bangkok. That's what the official record said. That's what my discharge paper said. But we weren't in Bangkok. We were flying low over the Cambodian border, carrying a cargo that wasn't on any manifest. Mitchell wasn't a senator then. He was just a terrifyingly ambitious intelligence officer attached to our unit. He was the one who ordered the flight. And now, 50 years later, Holloway, my commanding officer, had dug up the evidence. I looked back into the box. Beneath the photo lay 3 reels of magnetic audio tape. The labels were typed on an old typewriter. Mission log 12-12-72. If these tapes contained what I thought they did, they proved that Senator Mitchell was a war criminal. They proved he ordered a strike on a village that shouldn't have been there. "Holloway, you old son of a bitch," I said, my voice cracking. "You kept them. You stole the tapes and you kept them. That explained the warm helicopter. Holloway knew he was dying. He knew Mitchell was close to the White House. He had tried to fly the evidence out to get it to someone who could use it, but his heart gave out before he could finish the job. So he left it to the only mechanic he trusted to keep the machine running. Suddenly, a sound shattered the silence of the kitchen. Ring! I jumped, knocking a salt shaker off the table. It smashed on the floor. It was the landline. The yellowed rotary phone hanging on the wall near the pantry. No one calls that number. The only people who have it are the VA hospital and, well, Holloway. Ring! Titan barked, sharp and loud. He backed away from the phone like it was a rattlesnake. I stared at it. The sound was shrill, demanding. It echoed through the empty house. I walked over to the wall. My hand hovered over the receiver. If I picked it up, I was acknowledging I was home. I was engaging. Ring! I snatched the receiver up and held it to my ear. I didn't say a word. I just listened to the dead air, the static of the copper wires humming in the storm. Mr. Vance, a voice said. It wasn't a robotic voice. It was smooth, cultured, distinctly American East Coast. It sounded like a man you'd meet at a country club, discussing golf handicaps. I assume you found the package, the voice said. I stayed silent. Rule number 1, don't give away intel. Caleb, the voice continued, softer this time. May I call you Caleb? We respect your service. We truly do. You're a patriot, but you have something that doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the Department of Defense. It's classified material. It belongs to the truth, I croaked. My voice sounded rusty. The man sighed. It was a sound of genuine disappointment, like a father dealing with a petulant child. Truth is a matter of perspective, Caleb. Senator Mitchell is about to lead this country into a new era of prosperity. Do you really want to derail that because of a clerical error from 50 years ago? It wasn't a clerical error, I said, my anger flaring hot enough to burn through the fear. It was a massacre. That's your PTSD talking, the voice said soothingly. Now listen closely. We don't want to hurt you. You're a hero. We just want the case. Leave it on the porch. We'll take it and you'll never see us again. Your pension will double. You can fix up that farm. I looked down at Titan. He was sitting at my feet watching my face. His muzzle was gray. His eyes were cloudy with cataracts. And if I don't? I asked. The silence on the other end stretched out for 5 long seconds. I was looking at your veterinary records, Caleb, the voice said. The tone had changed. The warmth was gone. It was cold steel now. Your dog, Titan, he has dilated cardiomyopathy, doesn't he? Congestive heart failure. My grip tightened on the phone handset. You leave him out of this. He requires vetmedin, the voice recited, reading from a file. 10 milligrams twice a day. Without it, his lungs fill with fluid. He drowns from the inside out. It's a terrible way to die. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at the pill bottle on the counter. It was nearly empty. I had a refill waiting at the pharmacy in town for tomorrow morning. The pharmacy in town is owned by a subsidiary of a company we control, the man said, as if reading my mind. Whatever stock they have can easily be misplaced or tainted. You son of a bitch, I whispered. You have a choice, Caleb. You can be the crusader for a dead cause, or you can be a good master to your dog. You have until sunrise. Place the case on the porch and Titan gets his medicine. Keep it and, well, nature takes its course. Click. The line went dead. I stood there holding the humming receiver, my knuckles white. I looked down at Titan. He wagged his tail once, thumped it against the cabinet, and let out a wheezing cough. They weren't just threatening my life. They were holding my dog's heart hostage. I slammed the phone back onto the cradle. The plastic cracked. I looked at the Pelican case. I looked at the dark window where the SUV sat, waiting like a vulture. They think they have leverage, I said to the empty room. I walked over to the drawer where I kept my old field cleaning kit. I wasn't going to give them the case, and I wasn't going to let Titan die. I opened the drawer and pulled out the only thing Holloway had left me besides the helicopter. A .45 caliber M1911 pistol. They forgot one thing, Titan, I said, racking the slide to check the chamber. We're air cavalry. We don't surrender. We attack. But first I had to play those tapes. I had to know exactly what was worth killing a dog for. I grabbed the case and headed for the basement. It was time to fire up the radio. My basement isn't just a basement. In the Pacific Northwest, where the damp gets into your bones and the winters drag on for 6 months. A man needs a sanctuary. For some, it's a den with a flat-screen TV and a beer fridge. For me, it's the workshop. It smells of sawdust, hops number 9 gun oil, and the ozone tang of old electronics. It's where I fix things that the world says are too broken to save. I didn't walk down the stairs. I carried Titan. He hates being picked up. It wounds his dignity. But after that coughing fit in the kitchen, I wasn't taking any chances. He felt lighter than I remembered. The heart condition was stripping the muscle off his frame, turning my 90-pound warrior into a bag of fragile bones. I set him down on his dog bed in the corner, near the warmth of the furnace, and covered him with my old Army field jacket. "Stay put, Marine," I whispered. He rested his chin on his paws, watching me with eyes that were tired but alert. I moved to the workbench along the far wall. This was my shack, the amateur radio station I'd built piece by piece over 30 years. A wall of stacked transceivers, oscilloscopes, and tangled copper wire. But tonight I wasn't interested in the radio. Not yet. I pushed aside a coffee can full of rusted screws and pulled out an Akai reel-to-reel tape player I'd restored back in '98. It was a beautiful piece of machinery, heavy chrome and wood grain. I plugged it in. The VU meters glowed a soft, warm yellow. I took the first reel from the Pelican case. My hands were shaking, so I took a breath, held it, and threaded the magnetic tape through the capstans and pinch rollers. It was a ritual I hadn't performed in years. I flipped the switch to play. Hiss. The sound of 50-year-old static filled the room, crackling like frying bacon. Then voices cut through the noise. They were young, breathless, distorted by the poor quality of a field microphone. "Echo 1, this is Red Dog Actual. We have eyes on the village. Over." I recognized the voice immediately. It was Holloway. He sounded so young. "Red Dog, this is Command. Report status." That second voice. It was smoother, arrogant. Even through the static, it carried the unmistakable cadence of a man used to giving orders from an air-conditioned tent. It was Franklin Mitchell. "Command, target is confirmed negative for combatants." Holloway's voice came back, tense. "Repeat, negative. It's a medical relief station. Red Cross flags are visible. Only civilians and wounded. Over." I gripped the edge of the workbench. I remembered that day. I remembered waiting on the tarmac, the rotors of my Huey spinning, waiting for the go order that never made sense. The tape continued. "Red Dog, your intel is flawed," Mitchell's voice replied, cold as ice. "Target is a suspected supply depot for NVA regulars. You are authorized to clear the zone. Burn it down, Captain." "Negative, Command. I have women and children in the open. I am looking right at them." "Captain Holloway," Mitchell snapped, "if you do not execute the mission, I will call in an airstrike and level that entire grid square. You go in, you sanitize the area, or you face a court-martial for insubordination. Do you copy?" There was a long pause on the tape, just the sound of heavy breathing and the distant whump-whump of mortar fire. "I copy," Holloway whispered. "God forgive us. Out." Click-a-tummy-monk. The tape ran out, the loose end flapping rhythmically against the spool. Flap, flap, flap. I hit stop. The silence in the basement was deafening. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing a hand over my face. It was worse than I thought. Mitchell hadn't just made a bad call. He had blackmailed Holloway into committing a war crime to boost his own body count metrics. He had burned a medical camp to get a promotion, and now that man was polling 10 points ahead in the presidential race. "You kept the receipt, Jim," I murmured. "You recorded the comms." I looked at the ham radio setup. Holloway had left me the evidence, but he hadn't left me a plan. Or had he? I picked up the black and white photo again. On the back under the date was a frequency written in pencil. 14-259 mercenaries USB. It was a specific frequency on the 20-meter band. A gray frequency, usually quiet at night. I turned on my Kenwood transceiver. The display lit up amber. I spun the heavy VFO knob, tuning it until the numbers aligned. 14-259. I put on my headset and keyed the mic. "CQ, CQ, CQ," I said, my voice low. "This is Kilo Victor 7 Zulu calling on the blind. Looking for the ghost of 72. Over." It was a stupid code. I made it up on the spot. I released the button and listened to the static. Nothing. Just the cosmic noise of the ionosphere. "CQ, CQ," I tried again. "I have the package. The engine is warm. Is anyone out there?" I waited. I looked over at Titan. He was asleep, his breathing raspy and shallow. The fluid was building up in his lungs. If I didn't get him those pills by morning... "Station calling," a voice broke through the static. I jumped. It wasn't a military voice. It was a woman, older. Her voice wavered, fragile but sharp, like antique glass. "Station calling on 14-2-5. Identify," she said. I keyed the mic. "My name is Vance, Caleb Vance. I was a friend of Jim's." There was a pause. The signal faded in and out. Atmospheric skip conditions were rough tonight. "Caleb," the woman said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "Oh, thank God. I told Jim you were the only one stubborn enough to answer. This is Sarah. Sarah Halloway, the widow. I hadn't seen her since the funeral 2 weeks ago. She had stood by the grave, looking small and veiled in black, while Mitchell gave the eulogy. The irony made my stomach turn. "Mrs. Halloway," I said, "I found the box. I heard the tape. Why didn't he turn this in years ago?" "He was afraid, Caleb," Sarah replied. "Mitchell threatened our family. He threatened our grandchildren. Jim hid those tapes to keep us safe. But when he got the diagnosis, when he knew he was dying anyway, he decided it was time to clear his conscience." "He tried to fly it out himself, didn't he?" I asked. 2 weeks ago, she confirmed. "He spent months fixing up that old bird in your barn. He was going to fly the evidence to a journalist in Seattle. He got the engine running, did a test hover, and then his heart gave out. He died in the cockpit, Caleb. He didn't die in his sleep like the paper said." I looked up at the ceiling, imagining the Huey sitting directly above me in the barn. "So that's why the oil is clean." "They know you have it," Sarah said, her voice rising in panic. "The men in the suits. They work for Mitchell's private security firm. They call themselves the Cleaners. They don't leave loose ends." "I know," I said grimly. "They're outside my house right now. They threatened my dog." "Listen to me closely, Caleb," she said. "You can't drive out of there. They have the road blocked. The sheriff is on their payroll. If you try to leave by truck, they'll run you off the bridge." I felt a cold knot tighten in my gut. "So I'm trapped." "No," Sarah said. "Jim didn't leave you a truck. He left you a Hue. It's fueled. It's armed. Not with guns, but with countermeasures. He installed a jammer pod from his old surplus gear. It's illegal as hell, but it works." "You want me to fly it?" I asked. "Sarah, I haven't flown right seat in 40 years. I'm a mechanic, not a pilot." "It's like riding a bike, Caleb. A very loud, very dangerous bike," she said. "It's the only way. Bring the tapes to me. I'm at the cabin in the Cascades. I have the journalist waiting here. If you get the proof to us, Mitchell is finished. If they get into that house, you and the dog are history." Suddenly, the basement lights flickered. Once, twice, then total darkness. The hum of the furnace died. The warm glow of the radio faded. "Sarah?" I yelled into the dead mic. "Sarah?" Silence. They had cut the power. In the sudden quiet, I heard a sound from upstairs. The distinct creak of a floorboard in the hallway. The one right outside the kitchen. Titan's head snapped up in the darkness. He let out a bark that sounded more like a cough. They weren't waiting until morning. They were coming in now. I fumbled in the dark, my hand finding the cold steel of the .45 on the workbench. I clicked the safety off. "Okay, Titan," I whispered into the blackness. "Time to wake up. We've got company." I wasn't going to die in a basement, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let them take the only thing that mattered. I grabbed the Pelican case with one hand and the gun with the other. "Upstairs," I commanded. "We're going to the barn." The darkness in the basement wasn't empty. It was heavy, pressing against my eyes like a physical weight. But 40 years ago, the Army taught me that darkness is only an enemy if you don't know your terrain. And this wasn't a jungle in Southeast Asia. This was my home. I knew every creak of the cedar staircase. I knew that the third step from the top groaned like a dying man if you put your weight on the center, so you had to step on the edge, close to the wall. I knew the layout of the kitchen by the smell of the dried sage hanging near the pantry. "On me, Titan," I breathed. Titan didn't need the command. He was pressed against my calf, his body heat the only reassuring thing in the cold void. I could feel the vibration of his chest, a wet, rattling wheeze. The fluid was rising in his lungs. The stress was killing him faster than any bullet could. We moved up the stairs, moving as one entity. My left hand gripped the Pelican case. My right held the Colt 1911. I didn't want to use it. Shooting a man changes the air in a room, stains the walls with something you can never scrub off. But I wouldn't hesitate if they touched my dog. I reached the top of the stairs and cracked the door open an inch. A beam of white light sliced through the kitchen. It swept over the counters, the sink, the table where my unpaid bills sat. It stopped on the empty dog bowl. The intruder was standing near the refrigerator, tall, wearing a dark suit that looked ridiculous in a farmhouse kitchen. In his hand, he held a pistol with a suppressor, a long black tube meant to turn a gunshot into a polite cough. He was professional. He wasn't rushing. He was hunting. I needed a distraction. I couldn't engage him head on. My eyes were 60 years old and his were probably 25 and aided by night vision gear. I reached into the pocket of my flannel shirt and pulled out a handful of brass shell casings I'd picked up at the range last week. I always kept them. Reloading saves money. I waited for the light to sweep toward the living room. Clink. I tossed the casings toward the front entryway, bouncing them off the hardwood floor. The sound was sharp, distinct, like the sound of a deadbolt sliding. The intruder spun around, his weapon raising instantly toward the front door. "Contact front," he whispered into a headset. He moved toward the noise. That was my window. "Go," I signaled to Titan. We slipped out of the stairwell, staying low, moving behind the kitchen island. We reached the mudroom door at the back of the house. I didn't open it immediately. I felt the glass. It was freezing. I turned the lock silently and pushed. The wind caught the door, ripping it from my hand and slamming it against the siding with a bang that sounded like a cannon shot. "Damn it!" "Rear exit!" the voice yelled from the kitchen. We bolted into the night. The storm hit us like a physical blow. The rain was horizontal, driven by a wind coming straight off the Pacific. It was freezing, turning the dirt of the backyard into a slurry of mud and ice. We made it 10 yards before Titan stumbled. His front legs just folded. He went down into the mud, his muzzle bearing in the slush. He let out a sound that tore my heart in half, a sharp, panicked yelp followed by a desperate gasping for air. I skidded to a stop and dropped to my knees beside him. The Pelican case sank into the mud. "Titan, up! Get up, buddy!" I grabbed his harness. He tried to push himself up, his back legs scrabbling for traction, but he didn't have the strength. He looked at me, his eyes wide and terrified in the gloom. He wasn't afraid of the men with guns. He was afraid because his body was failing him. He was drowning on dry land. Behind us, the back door of the house flew open. A flashlight beam cut through the rain, searching. We were exposed. 2 old soldiers stranded in the middle of the yard. "I've got you," I gritted out. I didn't think. I just acted. I grabbed the Pelican case and shoved it under the nearby woodpile, hiding it beneath a tarp. I couldn't carry both. Then I shrugged off my heavy field jacket. The freezing rain hit my thermal shirt instantly, biting into my skin, but I didn't care. I wrapped the jacket around Titan's shivering body, pulling the hood over his head to shield him from the deluge. "You are not dying in the mud," I told him, my face inches from his wet nose. "You hear me? We finished the mission." I hooked my arms under his chest and haunches. I lifted. He was 90 pounds of dead weight, slipping and sliding in my grip. My lower back screamed in protest. My knees burned. But I stood up. I cradled him against my chest like a child. "Hey!" a voice shouted over the wind. "Target in the yard!" A bullet thwipped past my ear and slapped into the mud. No warning shot. They were shooting to kill. I didn't run. I couldn't run with Titan in my arms. I moved with purpose toward the old tractor shed, using the rusted hulk of my John Deere as cover. Bullets pinged off the tractor's engine block. Ping, ping. I set Titan down behind the massive rear tire. He was coughing, but the jacket was keeping him warm. "Stay," I ordered. I needed to buy us time. I looked at the pole barn across the yard where the helicopter waited. It was 50 yards away, too far to cross under fire. Then I looked up at the main breaker box mounted on the side of the tractor shed. It controlled the exterior floodlights, the high wattage halogens I used during calving season. The intruders were wearing night vision goggles. I knew the type. They amplified available light by 50,000 times. I smiled. It was a grim, mirthless smile. Let there be light. I reached up and slammed the breaker handle up. Click. 4,000 watts of halogen light exploded into life instantly. It was blinding. Even for me, it was like staring into the sun. For the men in the yard wearing night vision goggles, it would be blindingly painful. Their expensive optics would flare out, leaving them seeing nothing but white spots for a good 30 seconds. "My eyes, contact blinded," someone screamed. "Now Titan," I yelled. I grabbed the dog. He had rallied a bit, adrenaline cutting through the exhaustion, and we ran. I didn't have the case, but I knew I could come back for it once the bird was spun up. Or maybe, wait, I patted my pocket. The tapes. I had taken the reels out of the case in the basement. I had shoved them into the cargo pocket of my pants. The case was a decoy. I had the evidence on me. We splashed through the puddles, slipping, sliding, gasping for air. The barn doors loomed ahead. They were massive, sliding wooden doors on a steel track. I threw my shoulder against the wood. It groaned and slid open just enough for us to squeeze through. We tumbled inside onto the dry concrete floor. The sound of the rain muffled instantly, replaced by the smell of grease and aviation fuel. The Huey sat there, my inheritance, my getaway car. I looked at Titan. He shook the water off my jacket, which was still draped over him. He looked at the helicopter, then at me, and gave a short, sharp bark. Get in. I scrambled up the side of the fuselage and threw open the pilot's door. I helped Titan up into the co-pilot's seat. He curled up on the leather, shivering but safe. I climbed into the pilot's seat and strapped in. The seat felt cold. Outside, the shouting was getting closer. They had recovered their vision. They were coming for the barn. I looked at the instrument panel. It was dark, dead. I closed my eyes for a second, visualizing the startup sequence I hadn't performed in 40 years. Battery on, fuel boost pump on, starter gen. Please, I whispered to the soul of the machine. Don't be a relic tonight. Be a soldier. I flipped the master battery switch. The dashboard lit up with a beautiful amber glow. The needles on the gauges jumped to life. I pressed the starter button. Whine. The starter motor engaged. A high-pitched whine that slowly, agonizingly, began to build in pitch. The main rotor blade above us jerked. Once. Twice. Whine. Whoosh. Come on, I gritted my teeth. Come on, you beautiful beast. Bang. Ampery. A bullet punched through the wood of the barn door, splintering the timber. Then another. They were shooting blindly into the hangar. The turbine caught. Whoosh, roar. The engine ignited with a sound like a dragon waking up. The exhaust temp gauge climbed into the green. The whine deepened into a roar. The rotor blades began to blur, spinning faster and faster, whipping the stale air of the barn into a frenzy. Hay and dust exploded outward. I looked out the side window. The barn doors were shaking. I grabbed the collective pitch lever with my left hand. I gripped the cyclic with my right. Titan, I yelled over the roar of the engine. Hang on! I pulled up on the collective. The skids left the concrete. We were floating. But we were still inside the barn, and the door wasn't open wide enough for the rotors to clear. I looked at the flimsy wooden doors. Then I looked at the armored nose of the UH-1 Iroquois. Knock, knock, I said. I pushed the stick forward. The transition from the barn to the sky wasn't graceful, it was violent. I shoved the cyclic stick forward, and the nose of the Huey dipped like a charging bull. The rotor blades, spinning at 324 revolutions per minute, bit into the damp air. We didn't just fly out, we tore our way out. Crash. The wooden barn doors exploded outward. Splinters the size of javelins rained down into the mud. The armored nose of the helicopter punched through the rotten timber as if it were wet cardboard. For a heartbeat, I was blind. Dust, hay, and wood chips swirled in the floodlight beams, coating the windshield. Then the downdraft cleared the air, and the ground fell away. We lurched upward. The sensation of lift, that stomach-dropping, gravity-defying pull, hit me harder than I remembered. My gut clenched. Ping, ping, thwack. Bullets. They were firing at the belly of the aircraft. I heard the impacts against the aluminum skin, dull thuds that vibrated through the floor pedals. Hang on, Titan, I yelled. I pulled the collective lever up into my armpit, demanding maximum power. The turbine engine screamed a high-pitched protest, the exhaust temperature gauge flirting with the red line. The Huey shuddered, then leaped 300 feet into the darkness, leaving the tracers and the farmhouse far below. We were airborne. I banked hard to the left, putting the aircraft into a steep turn toward the tree line. I needed to get away from the lights. In the dark, I was a ghost. Illuminated by the floodlights, I was a target. Below me, my farm was shrinking. The house I'd lived in for 30 years, the tractor shed, the garden where my wife used to grow tomatoes. It all looked like a model train set now. I saw the tiny figures of the men in suits running toward their SUVs. They were too late. I leveled out at 500 feet, skimming just above the tops of the Douglas firs. This was nap of the earth flying, hugging the terrain to stay off radar. It was reckless in a storm, suicidal even, but it was the only way to disappear. The rain hammered against the plexiglass windscreen like handfuls of gravel. The wind shear buffeted the tail, trying to spin us around, but my muscle memory was waking up. My hands and feet moved independently of my brain, making micro adjustments to keep us steady. I looked over at the co-pilot's seat. Titan was pressed back against the leather, his eyes wide. The noise in the cockpit was deafening, a roar that drowned out even the thunder. "I got you, buddy," I shouted, though he couldn't hear me. I reached for the spare headset hanging on the hook behind my head. It was an old David Clark aviation headset, heavy and green with thick gel ear cups. I leaned over, keeping one hand on the stick, and gently placed the headset over Titan's ears. He shook his head annoyed, but didn't paw it off. The noise dampening must have been a relief. He looked at me, his tongue lolling out slightly. He wasn't panting from heat, he was panting from stress. But he was alive, and he was with me. I adjusted my own headset and flipped the toggle switch on the radio console. "Station Sarah," I said into the boom mic. This is Echo 1. We are dust off. I repeat, we are airborne. Over." Static hissed in my ears, mixed with the crackle of lightning. I watched the frequency display, 14.2 on FE5 MHz. "Caleb?" The widow's voice came through, clearer now that we had altitude. "Oh, thank God. I heard the shots. I thought—" "They missed," I said, my voice tight. "But I can't go back there, Sarah. My life just burned down with that bridge." "You have a new life now," she said firmly. "But first we have to finish Jim's mission. What is your heading?" I glanced at the magnetic compass on the dash. It was spinning lazily before settling. "Heading east-southeast. I'm following the logging road up toward Mount Hood. I'm flying VFR, visual flight rules, in a storm, Sarah. I can barely see the treetops. I need a destination." "You know the old fire lookout on Iron Peak?" she asked. I frowned. Iron Peak was deep in the Cascades, miles from civilization. "The one the Forest Service abandoned in the 90s? That's at 6,000 feet. In this weather, that's icing territory." "It's the only place safe enough," she replied. "Jim stockpiled fuel there. And that's where the journalist is waiting. He hiked in 2 days ago. If you can get the tapes to him, he has a satellite uplink. He can broadcast the audio before Mitchell's men can stop it." "A satellite uplink from a fire tower," I muttered. Jim really thought of everything. "He knew he was running out of time," Sarah said softly. "Caleb, you need to know what's on the rest of those tapes." I tightened my grip on the collective. "I heard enough. Mitchell ordered a strike on a civilian camp." "It's worse," she said. "Mitchell didn't just order it. He orchestrated it to cover up a failed CIA operation. There were American POWs in that camp, Caleb. Our own boys. He sacrificed them to keep his record clean." My blood ran cold. I thought I had left my capacity for shock back in the jungle. But this hit me in the gut. American prisoners. Men we might have known. Men we might have drank beer with in Saigon. "He killed his own men," I whispered. "And he's going to be president," Sarah said. "Unless you land that bird." Suddenly, a red light flashed on the dashboard. "Master caution." My eyes scanned the instrument cluster. Oil pressure? Good. Hydraulics? Good. Then I saw it, the chip detector light. "Damn it," I cursed. "What is it?" Sarah asked, hearing the change in my breathing. "Chip light," I said. "It means there are metal shavings in the transmission fluid. The gears are grinding. Jim might have replaced the seals, but this transmission is 50 years old. If it seizes, we drop like a rock." "Can you make it?" I looked at the fuel gauge. We had enough gas. I looked at Titan, who had finally laid his head down on his paws, lulled by the vibration. "I've flown worse birds through worse weather," I lied. "I'll get it there." "But Sarah, I've got headlights below me." I looked down through the chin bubble window near my feet. On the logging road far below, a convoy of 3 vehicles was moving fast, their high beams cutting through the rain. They were matching my speed. "They're tracking me," I said. "How? I'm running dark." "The transponder!" Sarah cried. "Jim put a digital transponder in the tail for emergency location. It must be broadcasting." I reached for the avionics panel to kill the breaker, but then I stopped. A plan, crazy, dangerous, and entirely American, formed in my mind. "Let them track me," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "They're in SUVs on a muddy logging road. I'm in a Huey. Let's see how they handle the terrain." I banked the helicopter hard to the right, breaking away from the road and heading straight toward the sheer granite face of Iron Peak. "Sarah, I'm going radio silent until final approach." I need to concentrate. Get that journalist ready. Godspeed, Caleb. Out. I clicked the radio off. The silence in the headset was sudden. Now it was just me, the dog, and the groaning metal of a dying machine. I looked at Titan. You awake, Marine? He lifted his head and looked at me. We've got a mountain to climb, I told him. And we've got a tail. Don't worry, I know these woods better than they do. I pulled the nose up. The altimeter started to wind upward. We rose into the clouds, blinding white in the strobe lights, climbing toward the snow line. The transmission whined, a high, frantic sound. But I pushed it. For the ghosts of 1972, for Titan, for the truth. We punched through the cloud layer and into the moonlight. The peak loomed ahead, jagged and black against the stars. And that's when the second warning light flickered on. Low fuel. I tapped the gauge. It dropped to 0, then bounced back to empty. A leak. The bullets from the farm must have nicked the tank. I wasn't just racing the bad guys anymore. I was racing gravity. The fuel gauge on a Bell UH-1 is a simple instrument. It doesn't bargain and it doesn't lie. The needle was buried in the red slash marked empty, tapping against the plastic stop like a finger on a coffin lid. We were at 4,000 feet, climbing through a blinding snowstorm, running on vapor and prayers. Come on, don't quit on me now, I whispered, patting the dashboard. The vibration in the airframe had changed. It wasn't the rhythmic thump-thump of a healthy rotor anymore. It was a shudder, a grinding metallic complaint that traveled up through the seat and settled in my teeth. The transmission was eating itself alive. The metal shavings, the chips warned about by the dashboard light, were chewing through the gears. I looked over at Titan. The heavy aviation headset was still clamped over his ears, making him look like a bizarre, furry co-pilot. He wasn't sleeping anymore. He was sitting bolt upright, staring out into the swirling white void of the storm. He knew. Animals always know when the machine they are riding in is dying. Almost there, buddy, I lied. Just a little further. Below us, the world was a black abyss. The logging roads were invisible now, buried under the canopy of pines. But I knew the cleaners were down there. They would be in their 4x4s, pushing their engines to the limit, tracking the transponder signal Sarah had told me about. They were wolves chasing a wounded bird, waiting for gravity to do their work for them. I checked the GPS coordinates Sarah had given me. Iron Peak Fire Lookout. It appeared on the horizon, a jagged shadow against the slightly lighter gray of the storm clouds. A lonely spire of rock jutting out of the timberline. At the very top, I saw a flicker of light. It wasn't a star, it was a flare. Someone was waving a red road flare from the catwalk of the old fire tower. I see you, I said, my heart leaping. Visual contact. But just as the hope hit me, the sound I had been dreading filled the cockpit. Sputter. Cough. The turbine engine hiccuped. The torque needle dropped, then spiked, then dropped again. Master caution, low RPM. The audio warning horn began to blare. A piercing, rhythmic beep, beep, beep that cut through the headset. Fuel starvation, I shouted, though only Titan was there to hear. We're flaming out. I did the only thing a pilot can do when the engine dies 300 feet above a mountain. I dropped the collective lever instantly. By lowering the pitch of the rotor blades, I disconnected them from the dying engine. The silence that followed was terrifying. The roar of the turbine was gone, replaced only by the rush of wind and the whoosh-whoosh of the free-spinning blades. We were falling, but we were falling with style. It's called auto-rotation. It's like turning a helicopter into a maple seat. As you fall, the air rushing up through the rotors keeps them spinning, generating just enough lift to keep you from turning into a crater. But you only get one shot at the landing. You can't pull up. You can't go around. You land where you land, or you die. Brace, I yelled, reaching over to press my hand against Titan's chest, holding him into the seat. The ground rushed up at us, a blur of white snow and black rock. I waited. I watched the altimeter unwind. 200 feet, 100, 50. Now! At 20 feet, I pulled back hard on the cyclic to flare the nose up, bleeding off our forward speed. Then I pulled the collective up, using the last bit of stored energy in the spinning blades to cushion the fall. Crunch. We hit the snow. The skids dug in deep. The helicopter bounced once, violently, spinning sideways. The tail boom clipped a boulder with a sickening screech of tearing metal. We slid for 20 yards across the icy summit, snow spraying over the windshield like a tidal wave, before coming to a shuddering halt just 10 feet from the base of the fire tower. Silence returned to the mountain. I sat there for a moment, gasping for air, my hands locked onto the controls in a death grip. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling metal and the wind howling through the broken tail section. I looked at Titan. He was shaken, sliding down into the footwell, but he was moving. He shook off the headset and looked up at me, letting out a soft whine. "We made it," I wheezed. "We're down." I unbuckled my harness and shoved the door open. The cold was absolute, a biting, freezing wind that instantly numbed my face. This was the high Cascades in winter. I grabbed the Pelican case from the back. I grabbed the .45 pistol. Then I hauled Titan out into the snow. The snow was thigh-deep. Titan struggled, sinking into the powder, but he plowed forward, fueled by that indomitable Malinois spirit. "Over here," a voice shouted. A figure came running down the stairs of the fire tower. He was wearing a bright orange parka and holding a red flare. He was young, maybe 30, with a scruffy beard and glasses that were fogged up. He looked more like a Seattle barista than a war correspondent, but right now he looked like an angel. "I'm Miller," he yelled over the wind. "The journalist. Sarah sent me." "Vance," I grunted, shoving the Pelican case into his chest. "That's the payload. Get it inside. Do you have the uplink?" "It's set up," Miller shouted, staring at the smoking wreckage of the helicopter. "My God, you actually flew that thing?" "Less talking, more uploading," I snapped, "and they're coming." As if on cue, headlights crested the ridge behind us. The SUVs. They had found the service road. They were grinding up the final switchback, their tires churning through the snow. 3 vehicles. They fanned out, blocking the only exit from the peak. Doors opened. Men in tactical gear stepped out. They didn't look like the polite voices on the phone anymore. They were holding assault rifles. We were trapped on the summit. The helicopter was dead. We had nowhere to run. Miller looked terrified. He clutched the case to his chest. "What do we do? They're heavily armed." I looked at the SUVs. Then I looked at the helicopter wreckage. I looked at the narrow, icy path the vehicles had to take to reach us. I remembered the farm. I remembered how I used to clear tree stumps with dynamite. I didn't have dynamite, but I had something else. "Get to the tower," I ordered Miller. "Start the broadcast. Don't stop no matter what you hear." "What about you?" Miller asked. "I'm going to buy you some time." I looked down at Titan. He was shivering, the cold seeping into his bones. But he was standing his ground, placing himself between me and the gunman. "Titan," I said softly, "guard." I pointed to Miller. Titan hesitated. He looked at me, then at the stranger. He didn't want to leave me. "Go!" I roared. "Guard him!" Titan whimpered, then turned and followed Miller up the tower stairs. He knew his duty. He had to protect the objective. I turned back to the oncoming SUVs. I checked the magazine in my .45, 7 rounds. Not enough for a firefight. But I wasn't planning on a firefight. I crawled back toward the helicopter wreckage. The fuel tank was ruptured. I could smell the JP-4 aviation fuel soaking into the snow. It was a river of flammable liquid running downhill, right toward the path of the approaching cars. I waited. The lead SUV inched forward. A man shouted through a megaphone, "Mr. Vance, this is the end of the line. Put your hands up." I crouched behind the twisted fuselage of the Huey, my old friend. It had carried me out of the jungle in '72. It had carried me out of the farm tonight. And now it had one last mission to perform. "You're right," I whispered, pulling the last road flare from the emergency kit on the wall. "It is the end of the line." I cracked the flare. It hissed into brilliant red life. I stood up, exposing myself to the headlights. "Hey!" I screamed, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. The men paused. They raised their rifles. "You boys forgot one thing," I yelled. "You're standing in my gas station." I threw the flare into the fuel-soaked snow. The road flare tumbled through the air in slow motion, a sputtering arc of red phosphorus against the black sky. It looked less like a weapon and more like a dying star falling to earth. It hit the snow 20 feet in front of the lead SUV. For a split second, nothing happened. The mercenaries inside the truck probably laughed. A flare? Against armored glass? Then the red ember touched the river of JP-4 aviation fuel that was seeping from the crushed belly of my helicopter. Whumph! It wasn't the cinematic, high-explosive boom you see in Hollywood movies. It was a sudden, terrifying intake of breath by the mountain itself. The fuel vapors ignited instantly. A wall of orange flame, 30 feet high and hotter than the hinges of hell, roared into life. It raced down the fuel trail like a living snake, snapping at the tires of the SUVs. "Reverse! Reverse!" I heard someone scream over the crackle of the fire. The lead SUV slammed into reverse, tires spinning frantically on the ice. It fishtailed, metal grinding against the guardrail, before sliding sideways into the ditch. The other two vehicles scrambled back, retreating from the sudden inferno. They weren't blinded by floodlights this time. They were blocked by a literal firewall. The heat was intense. It melted the snow instantly, sending clouds of hissing steam into the night air. I shielded my face with my arm and scrambled backward, away from the wreckage of the Huey. "Goodbye, old girl," I whispered to the burning helicopter. "You did your job." I turned and ran for the fire tower. My legs were screaming, my lungs burning from the thin mountain air, but I forced myself up the steel stairs. One flight, two flights. I burst into the observation cabin at the top. It was freezing inside, the windows rattled by the wind, but Miller, the journalist, was hunched over a ruggedized laptop powered by a portable generator. Titan was standing right beside him, his head resting on Miller's knee, watching the screen. "Tell me good news, son," I yelled, slamming the door shut and bolting it. Miller looked up. His face was pale, illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. "The uplink is slow. The storm is interfering with the satellite signal. We're at 80%. 80% isn't enough," I said, moving to the window. Down below, the fire was already dying down. Aviation fuel burns hot, but it burns fast. The wall of flame was shrinking. Through the smoke, I saw the tactical team regrouping. They were getting out of the cars. They were putting on gas masks. They were coming on foot. "They're breaching the perimeter," I said, racking the slide on my .45. "How much time?" 2 minutes, Miller shouted, typing furiously. "I'm patching the audio directly to the Associate Press servers in New York and London. Once it hits, it's everywhere." I looked at Titan. He looked back at me. He wasn't trembling anymore. He sensed the finality of the moment. I knelt down and hugged him, burying my face in his fur. He smelled like wet dog and aviation grease. The best smell in the world. "If they come through that door," I told him, "you get behind me, understand?" He licked my cheek. Crack! A bullet shattered the window above my head. Glass rained down on the floor. "Get down!" I roared, shoving Miller under the heavy steel desk. I took up a position behind an old cast-iron wood stove. I aimed at the trapdoor entrance of the tower. Footsteps clanged on the metal stairs outside. Heavy boots. Fast. 95%, Miller yelled from under the desk. "Come and get it!" I shouted at the door. The handle turned. Then something strange happened. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath. I waited for the breach charge. I waited for the flashbang. Instead, I heard a phone ringing. Not inside the room, outside on the catwalk. A muffled voice spoke through the door. It was the leader of the tactical team. "Copy that, are you sure?" "Understood. Abort. I repeat, abort." The handle released. The footsteps clanged again, but they were going down. I stood up slowly, keeping the gun trained on the door. "What just happened?" Miller crawled out from under the desk. He pointed at the laptop screen. A green bar was flashing. Upload complete. "Look," Miller said, switching tabs to a live news feed. On the screen, a breaking news banner was already scrolling across CNN. "Breaking: Senator Mitchell implicated in 1972. War crimes cover-up. Leaked tapes reveal massacre orders. DOJ launches immediate probe." The audio, the crackling voice of young Holloway and the cold orders of Mitchell, was playing on national television. I walked to the broken window and looked down. The SUVs were turning around. They were leaving. They were mercenaries paid to protect a reputation. Now that the reputation was destroyed, the contract was void. There was no point in killing us anymore. It would only add a murder charge to a sinking ship. I watched their taillights disappear down the mountain road. The adrenaline that had kept me moving for the last 8 hours suddenly evaporated. My knees gave out, and I slid down to the floor, leaning against the wall. Titan trotted over and curled up in my lap, resting his heavy head on my chest. "We did it, buddy," I whispered, stroking his ears. "Mission accomplished." Epilogue: The Thaw. 3 months later. Spring comes late to the Pacific Northwest, but when it arrives, it hits you all at once. The gray skies break apart, revealing a blue so deep it hurts your eyes. The Douglas firs turn a vibrant green, and the air smells of wet earth and life. I sat on the porch of my farmhouse, rocking slowly in my chair. The coffee in my mug was hot and black, just the way I like it. The house was quiet. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. The cleaners never came back. Mitchell resigned in disgrace 3 days after the broadcast. He's currently awaiting trial in The Hague. The government, in a rare moment of apology, quietly reinstated my full benefits and cleared Holloway's service record. They even sent a team to clean up the helicopter wreckage on Iron Peak. But the best part wasn't the justice. I looked out into the yard. The grass was tall and green. Titan was out there. He wasn't lying on a rug. He was chasing a tennis ball. He moved a little slower than he used to, sure, but he was moving. The surgery at the University Vet Clinic, paid for by a frantic GoFundMe campaign started by Miller, had worked. The medication was managing his heart condition. He had his breath back. He retrieved the ball and trotted back to the porch, dropping it at my feet with a wet plop. He looked up at me, tail wagging, eyes bright and clear. "You want another one?" I asked. He barked, a real deep, healthy bark. I picked up the ball. I thought about the helicopter. I thought about Holloway. I thought about the night the engine was warm. I realized something then. A legacy isn't about machines or tapes or headlines. It's about the promises you keep. Holloway promised to tell the truth. I promised to protect the dog. We both kept our word. I threw the ball as hard as I could toward the barn. Titan took off like a rocket, his paws tearing up the fresh earth. I took a sip of coffee and smiled. The engine was cold now, but the heart was just fine. The end. Author's note to the audience. Thank you so much for flying with Caleb and Titan on this journey. It has been an honor to craft this story for you, exploring the depths of loyalty, the shadows of history, and the unbreakable bond between a canine and his handler. We started with a mystery in a barn and ended with justice on a mountaintop. I hope this story reminded you that no matter how old the machinery is, it's the spirit inside that counts. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you were in Caleb's shoes, alone in a farmhouse with your dog and a terrifying warning, would you have opened that helicopter door, or would you have walked away? Let me know below. And if you love Titan, give this story a like.